In this video, we're going to see Russia finally gets its revenge on that Ukrainian helicopter that flew directly over a Russian trench last week. They do so by hunting down and destroying it. But not before the helicopter first drops all of its munitions on Russian positions. This is a massive mistake by the Ukrainian pilot that very nearly could have resulted in the deaths of many Russian soldiers. We're going to play through this fight in full speed first. And then slow it down frame by frame to see how and why Ukraine lost this helicopter and why this pilot made some really bad decisions. We'll start off with the original clip, which was released by the Russian Ministry of Defense. It shows a Russian operator spotting a Ukrainian attack helicopter in the distance. You can see him make the initial call over the radio and then fire his missile. The missile flies toward the target where it detonates, and then we see the helicopter catch fire and fall from the sky. Now we're going to switch over to footage from the helicopter's perspective. Here you can see the helicopter coming in nice and slow. Now we're going to switch back over to the Russian operator's point of view, and here we can see the helicopter coming in again, this time in much greater detail. And we're going to switch over to a third angle that gives us a good top-down perspective. What's interesting here is that I counted at least 8 impacts from incoming rounds on the ground near the helicopter, yet the helicopter keeps coming in slower. So what makes this helicopter so dangerous is the fact that it's carrying a massive payload of unguided rockets, which are absolutely devastating in a close air support role against ground targets. This helicopter is carrying about 80 of these rockets, and when it flies in like this, hugging the terrain and flying really slow, these rockets will tear up huge swaths of territory. So what we've got here is a single Russian soldier with a shoulder-fired missile, one helicopter with 80 unguided rockets, and a ton of Russian infantry fighting vehicles on the ground. So let's take a closer look at these two things. First, watch the helicopter again. Here it comes in nice and slow. Then there's a flash and a plume of smoke as something explodes on the ground nearby. Then the helicopter pulls up a little bit and then starts to drop its ordnance. Here's another explosion on the ground, and then here's another one. Meanwhile, we're going to switch over to the Russian ground forces. Here we see some infantry fighting vehicles racing out of the line of fire. And then here we see some more explosions from the rocket volley coming in. Now we're going to go back to the helicopter's perspective and watch it dive down to release its remaining munitions. There's another explosion on the ground. And then we see the helicopter pull up and away. And here comes the missile. Let's watch it one more time. The helicopter dives down to release its remaining munitions. There is an explosion on the ground and the helicopter pulls up and away right as the missile flies overhead. Now let's slow it down and see if we can figure out exactly what happened here. So first we're going to put it in slow motion and we'll get ready to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there were 9 rockets fired at the helicopter. Even though most of them missed, they came awfully close. And now we're going to switch over to the operator S point of view and see if we can spot the helicopter in the distance. So the helicopter is coming in a little bit low. Remember, this is a really bad idea in combat aviation because if you fly low and slow, you present a very large target to any anti-aircraft weapons. And this helicopter is loaded with 80 unguided rockets, meaning that if it exploded, it could very easily kill dozens or even hundreds of Russian soldiers. So this is a terrible idea, but that's not the only problem here. If we keep watching, the helicopter actually slows down even more. Here it is flying along at a really slow pace. Meanwhile, we're going to switch back over to our overhead view. Here we can see the helicopter making this turn. Turns out that this helicopter actually flew straight into a minefield and blew its tires out. That's why it's flying so slow. Now, if we go back to the operator's point of view, we can actually see the mines in the distance. They didn't really show up too well in the original clip. So here we see the helicopter coming in. Here we see the mines in the distance. And here we see the helicopter blow its tires out. Now this is a massive mistake by the Ukrainian pilot, but it gets worse. Remember, this helicopter is loaded with 80 unguided rockets. When it blows its tires, it's forced to fly really slow in order to keep from crashing. And that means that every single one of these rockets, which could very easily kill Russian infantry, is going to explode on a Russian position. Now luckily for the Russians, this isn't a large concentration of troops. This is an area that has seen relatively little action for quite some time. If the helicopter hadn't blown its tires, maybe it would have flown right over a trench full of troops, killing many of them. Now I want to make something clear here. The reason that this is so dangerous is not because of the helicopter itself. Helicopters are loud and they're annoying, but they don't really pose a huge threat in terms of raw firepower. The danger is in the munitions that they carry. These rockets in particular are terrifying. They are a form of indirect fire, meaning they don't have a direct line of sight to the target. Instead, they just shower explosives over a wide area, tearing up huge swaths of territory. This is one of the reasons why helicopters are so effective in a close air support role.
Nice.
But it also means that if one of these things explodes, it can easily kill hundreds of troops. Now, what makes this even crazier is the fact that the helicopter actually slowed down after blowing its tires. There's no reason to do that. It already dropped most of its ordnance, and it should just try to get out of there as fast as possible. But instead, it continues to fly along slowly. I think the pilot thought he was being clever by slowing down and dropping his altitude, thinking that the Russians wouldn't be able to hit him. But that's a really bad idea because it turns out that the Russians actually could hit him. Now, let's take a look at what happens next. So here we see the helicopter come in and it starts dropping its ordnance. And meanwhile, the operator is tracking it with his missile. So here we see the first part of the salvo. There's another explosion on the ground. Here's another one, and here's another one. Now, while this is going on, the operator finally gets a lock and he launches his missile. But because the helicopter is flying so slow, the missile doesn't have to travel that far. Here we see the missile in the air, and here it hits the helicopter and blows it out of the sky. Now here's the thing. If the helicopter hadn't blown its tires and was flying at normal speed, there's a good chance that the missile would have missed. It would have had to travel at least 12 kilometers in order to hit the helicopter. But because the pilot slowed down, the missile only had to travel 3 kilometers, which is nothing for a modern anti-air missile. Now, there's another thing that I want to talk about here, and that's the fact that the helicopter actually crossed into occupied airspace. So here we can see the helicopter making this turn. And remember, if it hadn't turned, it would have flown straight into a Russian minefield and probably destroyed itself. But in order to avoid the minefield, it actually crossed into Russian-controlled territory. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the rules of engagement are for a pilot in this situation. On one hand, he's in a fight with a numerically superior enemy. He's under attack and he needs help. On the other hand, if you're a Ukrainian pilot and you know that you're flying over Russian-controlled territory, you know that if you request support, you might be requesting a very risky mission. In this case, it actually worked out well for the Ukrainians, but that's not always going to be the case. Now, ultimately, the reason that Ukraine lost this helicopter is because their pilot made a series of really bad mistakes. First, he flew really slow and really low, which made him easier to hit. Second, he kept his helicopter in the fight after blowing his tires, which again made him much easier to hit. Third, he flew into Russian airspace, which means that he may have been flying over friendly forces when he requested support. And fourth, he carried a massive payload of unguided rockets into a fight that he was improperly set up to win. Now this guy is a hero. He went on a dangerous mission, and he took on a numerically superior enemy. And even though he made a bunch of mistakes, he still managed to accomplish his mission. But hopefully, this will be a lesson for other pilots that sometimes you just can't win a fight, no matter how hard you try. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and subscribe. Thanks for watching.